There is something going on in the bird cage. Like, I don't even know what to say to you guys right now. Two of them are talking shit about the other one, and the other one is doing some Mission Impossible shit where he's like jumping from the cage walls to the other cage wall to the, he's like, you know, catching himself with his beak. It's like, fuck up. Talking shit. What's up, Planet Earth? Today we're talking about how I go from idea to page. This is essentially a list of tools and techniques that I've, kind of picked up and put together into my process. In today's video, I'm going to try to keep it short, so these are just going to be kind of brief descriptions of each one of these. If you want me to go further in depth into them, please comment below, write your questions in, and I will get to them in a future video. And please note that I don't necessarily do these in any particular order. Obviously, you start with the idea, but beyond that, I tend to jump around. The idea doesn't have to be your entire story. It can simply be one cool thing that exists in your world, one character that you want to know more about, one particular plot point or moment that you really want to happen. It can literally be anything. The thought dump. I never actually called it that before. It's what Jenna Moresi calls it on her channel. This was something I already did on my own, and once I saw her do it and talk about it, I finally understood what the heck I was doing. The thought dump. This is where I just sit down and type out every idea that I have for my story, my world, my characters, whatever. Just word vomit onto the page. No idea is a bad idea in this stage. Nothing is too vague or too specific. I don't worry about prose or structure. I don't worry about continuity or specificity. I include dialogue if I have a really cool idea for a line of dialogue that I want to include. Even if I don't know yet who is speaking this line of dialogue, just write it down. Character bios, character profiles. I like to fill out an entire profile on each character. A character profile for me fills out a lot of information, including physical appearance, zodiac sign, personality, like introvert, extrovert, that kind of thing. Their family dynamic, family history, education, occupation, goals, fears, insecurities, talents, flaws, and much, much more. Anything and everything that I can think of that, makes a person. My first character profiles tend to be very, very detailed and kind of overly so. And then later I will sort of condense them into the most important aspects about the character. The more you know about your character, the easier it is to find their voice and write for them specifically. Index cards. This I took from the Breaking Bad writers and the Better Call Saul writers. What I do is I take moments of significance, cool settings, plot lines, plot points, and more from the thought dump and put each on its own index card. So an index card might literally just be a moment. Those of you who watched Breaking Bad like I did, you'll know this incredible moment. No spoilers for Breaking Bad. This won't spoil anything for you. But for those of you who have watched it, the writers explain that this one particular very famous moment lived on an index card for like 2 or 3 whole seasons, where they just kept bringing it to the next season because they couldn't use it yet, but they wanted to use it. And the index card simply said, ding, ding, boom. Ding, ding, boom. That was the index card. That's all it said on it, right? But we all know exactly what that moment is, don't we? So that's what I'm doing here in this phase of the index cards. Just this is, a big, impactful idea. It needs to be on this index card because I need to make this a moment. I need to make this a thing that happens, right? This also gives me the ability to move the cards around. As I said, that particular moment in the writer's room of Breaking Bad lived on for seasons because they thought of it a long time before they actually needed it. And with the ability to move the cards around and position them differently in relation to each other, this gives you sort of a godlike view of your book where you can actually see, what is happening, where you can see the timeline, where you can see how many, I color code all of them. Once I know the characters and stuff that are going into the story, I'll color code each character so that from across the room I can see how much of this story pertains to any particular character in relation to the other ones. It allows me to formulate the story in a very visual way. The Snowflake Method. This is the big one. I learned about the Snowflake Method from a random ad on YouTube that I clicked on once. This ad was selling a how-to book on writing with an interesting original method. I'll share some broad strokes here, but encourage you to go and actually purchase the actual book, The Snowflake Method, for the full context of what it all entails. The Snowflake Method essentially begins with the core idea of your story, and then you write the novel outward around that core idea, much like if you have a drop of moisture that freezes into a snowflake. It would go out in all directions evenly and yet uniquely its own. So that's the metaphor behind the Snowflake Method. It's taking the core idea of your novel and expanding it until it is a novel. First, you spend no less than 1 hour writing one sentence. This one sentence is your story, the entire summary of your entire story in one sentence. What is your story? Write it over and over and over again for an hour. Every time you write it and you're like, oh, that's pretty good, write it again anyway. Always looking for fat that you can cut out, things that are essential that you haven't included, anything to make this the most comprehensive summary of your story in one sentence. By the end of the hour, your sentence should be no more than about 15 words or so. Allow a little wiggle room there. But 15 words, give or take, for a one sentence summary of your entire novel. This sentence is ultimately going to become your elevator pitch. Not only can you quote it anytime somebody asks you what's your book about, but it is literally your entire novel just kind of folded onto itself like a samurai sword and just as sharp. It's really great. Then from this core sentence, the real work begins. You take that perfect sentence that you slaved over for an hour, this time expanding it to a full paragraph. The creator of the Snowflake Method suggests 5 sentences in that paragraph. This is one of the things that I modified. I do 7 for a reason that I will cover later on down in the video. But for the sake of easy math, let's use the example of 5. Once you turn that one sentence into a paragraph, you have now written your novel in one paragraph. You have the whole thing there from beginning to middle to end. Your entire story used to be one sentence, is now a paragraph of 5. Next, you turn each one of those 5 sentences from your paragraph into a paragraph of their own. Your one paragraph is now 5 paragraphs, a total of 25 sentences if you're doing 5. And once again, you have your entire novel beginning, middle to end. It was one sentence, then it was a 5-sentence paragraph, then it was 25 sentences spread across 5 paragraphs. And now you take each sentence in those 5 paragraphs, each one of those 25 sentences, and turn each one of them into a paragraph of their own. Now you have 25 paragraphs. And you just continue doing this over and over and over again, each time expanding on the world of your novel, expanding on the novel itself, and yet you always have a complete story. You always have the beginning, the middle, and the end right there. You just do it over and over and over again, and it expands until it becomes an entire novel. Now that's the idea behind the Snowflake Method. The thing is, I don't use it to write the entire novel this way. What I do is I use it to write the novel to a point, and then I go back and I divvy it up into chapters, and I do this again, the Snowflake Method again for each chapter. Chapter 1, I spend an hour writing a 1-sentence summary of what happens in that chapter, and then change that into 5 sentences, or 7 in my case, and then change that into 7 paragraphs, and then change that into, a paragraph for each one of those sentences, and on and on and on until the chapter is done. At all times throughout the writing process, you have a full, complete view of your entire story, no matter where you are in the writing process. That's what appealed to me about this method and why I use it in my sort of process. But again, I modified it, that first wave of the Snowflake Method where I'm writing my novel out. Once I get to a certain point, I'm not including dialogue or anything like that yet. It's really still just what is happening. From that, I create the outline. This outline is meant as a blueprint that I can constantly edit and return to as I continue writing. Usually upon completing a couple of chapters, I'll go back and touch up my outline. Inevitably, there will be things within these chapters that, came out of me while I was writing, and now will have butterfly effects that ripple throughout the novel. So as I write every couple of chapters, I'll go back, reread them, see what is new that is not in the outline, and start putting that in, or taking things out of the outline that conflict with what I've done. Updating the outline allows me to keep these things straight, the things that I've, trying to foreshadow because I know that they're happening later, things like that. Index cards. The second phase. The second phase is based off the outline, which was based off my short draft of the novel. This time, each card is no longer a singular moment or idea. Instead, each card is a summary of each chapter, or at the very least, I'll have a couple of cards that together make up a chapter. So that, again, when I'm looking at the full cards, I'm looking at the entire novel, I can see, how much is going on where, with what character, who I need to see more of, who I haven't seen in a while. Sometimes I'll just be like, I haven't seen any orange in a while. Where's this character? What's this character up to? Where are they in the story? So if you'll remember, last week I was having trouble with chapter 7, and I was even entertaining the thought that it was too soon for that chapter for this character, and I might need another chapter in this character's story before getting her there. Instead, what ended up happening, even after I had thought that I had fixed it, was when I started writing the following chapter, when I started actually writing it, I realized, wait a minute, there's this whole other chapter that I haven't written yet. Has nothing to do with either one of these characters, but that needs to come first. I was able to turn to my index cards, lay out the chapters in front of me, and start moving them around. And, it turns out that what I had as chapter 9 is now actually chapter 7. And so I'm having to write a new chapter 7 now. And what I thought was chapter 7 is actually now chapter 9. So that's index cards phase 2. Turning points. So I mentioned in the Snowflake Method that I use 7 sentences instead of 5. The reason for this is because my story structure of choice comes from the Screenwriter's Bible. I don't write movie scripts. I'm actually, for some reason, really bad in script form. I've tried writing scripts for the graphic novel I want to do, and it always ended up being better in prose than I don't know why. But I love the structure of these 7 turning points. So everybody knows that most films have 3 acts, unless it's a David Fincher film, in which case there might be 4. However, within these acts, these 3 acts, you can actually find up to 7 turning points, as described by the Screenwriter's Bible. Again, I defer you to the actual book. You will learn so much more. It was a huge, huge help for me. But the short of it is as follows. You have, number one, the setup. The setup is the status quo for your character and the world. Set the scene. Introduce the characters. A day in the life, etc. Number two, the catalyst. This is the moment that brings the protagonist into the adventure. Okay, the thing that sparks their journey. For example, in Star Wars, this would be the moment when R2-D2 plays the message for Luke that Leia made for Obi-Wan. This kickstarts the entire adventure. Number three, the big event. This is also called the point of no return. Before this moment, the protagonist can choose to bail on the adventure. They can choose to go home, watch Naruto, or whatever they want to do. But once the big event happens, they're in. They're committed. They're going on this quest. There's no going back. To continue with the Star Wars example, this would be the moment where Luke goes back home and finds his aunt and uncle, his caretakers, his family, brutally murdered and fried to extra crispy. Number four, the pinch. This, along with number five, the crisis, make up the bulk of the story. A series of events back and forth between the protagonist and the antagonist, or whatever the antagonistic force is in the story. Action, reaction, cause, effect, back and forth, on and on. This is the actual adventure that the character is on. Number five, the crisis. The main difference between the crisis and the pinch is that the crisis ends with the worst thing that can possibly happen. The character, the protagonist, hits rock bottom. All hope is lost. Number six, the showdown. This is exactly what it sounds like. The final confrontation between the protagonist and the antagonist. The big fight, the big battle. Number seven, the realization or the resolution, depending on what you're doing. If your story ends here, this is the resolution. The characters have learned a lesson and are now in a new phase of their life. If your story is continuing, whether it's a sequel or if you're using this for a chapter, for example, and there's a chapter afterwards, then this is not the resolution, this is the realization. The realization is where the character learns something new that will propel them forward into the next part of the story. I try to incorporate these 7 turning points into everything that I write. Again, down to each chapter. So I have 7 turning points for my novel. I know where, in the story these things are happening. I have 7 turning points for each and every chapter within that novel. So what that does, it helps me make every chapter feel like a short story almost. Even if you hadn't read what came before or are not going to continue reading, you're still going to get the gist of what is going on in this chapter. The idea is tell a full story. Take the reader and the audience on a ride that they are going to enjoy and feel like they've accomplished something when they reach the end of it. It always keeps the story moving. As I do any and all of my writing, wherever I am in the process, I tend to bounce around. So again, if you are experiencing writer's block, you don't know what to write. Well, today you're not writing pages then. Today you're working on character bios, or you're working on, your maps, or whatever it is that you have to do. There's always something to be done if you're doing a novel. So I tend to bounce around from all of these techniques that I discussed today. Obviously, if you want to know more about them, as I said before, leave a comment down below, leave a question for me, and I'll cover it in a future video. If you enjoyed this video, if you learned anything at all, please give it a like. It's a big help. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. If you do subscribe, hit that notification bell so you find out when my videos go up. These things help my channel grow. My apologies for the lateness of the first podcast episode. I always intended on releasing it the same as the first YouTube video, the same week as the first YouTube video, but I want it to be better than what I was doing in my old podcast, and I have a very specific place I want to begin that particular show on, and it's just a matter of working out the schedule with my guest on the episode. So please just stay tuned to booksbyadrian.com for the latest, if you don't want to miss out on a single YouTube video, blog post, or podcast episode. Thanks again for watching, and remember, wash your hands, vampire cough, and avoid big crowds. Enjoy your coronacation.